The mountains of Afghanistan held their breath at 3:47 hours. 8 Navy SEALs lay motionless against the rocky outcropping, their night vision casting the world in alien green. Team leader Chief Petty Officer Marcus Viper Rodriguez pressed his eye to the scope, watching the Taliban compound below. Everything was going according to plan until the sound shattered the silence, a deep, thunderous roar that had no business being there. "What the hell is that?" whispered Petty Officer Second Class Jake Bulldog Morrison, his finger instinctively finding his rifle's trigger guard. The noise grew louder, impossibly loud, echoing off the canyon walls like the voice of some mechanical god. Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. That was the unmistakable growl of 4 Allison T-56 turboprop engines, a C-130 Hercules transport aircraft. But there was supposed to be no air traffic in this sector. The entire operation had been planned around complete radio silence and zero aerial footprint. Rodriguez grabbed his radio, switching to the command frequency. "Overwatch, this is Reaper 6. We have unauthorized aircraft inbound. Repeat, unauthorized aircraft. What's your status on friendly air assets?" Static crackled in his earpiece for what felt like eternity before the response came. "Reaper 6, negative on friendly air. We show no scheduled flights in your AO. Confirm aircraft type and heading." The C-130 roared directly overhead, so low that Rodriguez could see the rivets on its belly through his night vision. The aircraft's landing lights were dark, its navigation strobe silent. Ghost configuration. Whoever was flying that bird knew exactly what they were doing and exactly where they weren't supposed to be. "Four-engine turboprop, heading 270, altitude approximately 500 feet AGL," Rodriguez reported, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Overwatch, this bird is running dark and low. Request immediate identification." The SEALs remained frozen in position as the aircraft's engine noise began to fade into the distance. But something was wrong. The compound below, which had been eerily quiet just moments before, suddenly erupted in activity. Lights flickered on in windows. Shadows moved between buildings. Guard dogs began barking. "Shit," Morrison muttered. "They know we're here." Rodriguez's mind raced through the possibilities. Had the C-130 blown their cover? Was it Taliban, Pakistani, Chinese, or something else entirely? The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Someone had deliberately compromised their mission. The radio crackled again. "Reaper 6, be advised, we're tracking that aircraft on radar now. Flight originated from Kandahar at 3:15. No flight plan filed. No IFF transponder signal. Aircraft is completely dark." Rodriguez felt the first cold fingers of dread creep up his spine. A military transport aircraft, taking off from a NATO base without authorization, flying directly over their classified operation site. This wasn't just a screwed-up mission anymore. This was something much bigger, much darker, and infinitely more dangerous. Captain Evelyn Phoenix, Reyes, had been flying C-130s for 12 years, but she'd never stolen one before. Her hands gripped the yoke with white-knuckled intensity as she kept the massive aircraft just 500 feet above the jagged Afghan terrain. In the right seat, her loadmaster and only co-conspirator, Technical Sergeant Maria "Ghost" Santos, monitored the radar altimeter with laser focus. "Phoenix, we're painting multiple ground units at 2 o'clock, Santos reported through the internal comm system. "Looks like our friends down there just woke up." Reyes didn't respond immediately. She was too busy fighting the mountain winds that threatened to slam them into the rock faces looming on either side. The C-130 wasn't built for this kind of flying, nap-of-the-earth navigation through narrow mountain passes in complete darkness. But it was the only aircraft at Kandahar with the range and cargo capacity she needed for what came next. 24 hours earlier, Reyes had been just another transport pilot, ferrying supplies and personnel between forward operating bases. Then she'd overheard a conversation between two colonels in the officers' club that changed everything. Words like cover-up and war crimes and congressional investigation. They'd mention names, dates, locations, details that made her blood run cold. Now she was committing career suicide and possibly treason, but she couldn't live with what she knew. Not when American soldiers were dying because of lies told by men in air-conditioned offices thousands of miles from the battlefield. "Ghost, how's our fuel looking?" Reyes asked, banking the aircraft hard left to follow the canyon. "We've got 3 hours, maybe less with this low-level flying," Santos replied. "Phoenix, you sure about this? Once we cross into Pakistani airspace, there's no going back." Reyes thought about the flash drive hidden in her flight suit pocket. 47 gigabytes of classified documents, emails, and recorded phone conversations that would expose a conspiracy reaching from Kabul to the Pentagon. Evidence that could save lives or get them both killed. "I'm sure," she said quietly. "Check the cargo bay, make sure our passenger is secure." In the aircraft's cavernous belly, strapped to a parachute and sedated just enough to keep him unconscious but alive, was Colonel James Whitman, the architect of the cover-up and the man who'd ordered the deaths of anyone who got too close to the truth. Reyes had drugged his coffee during the mandatory flight safety briefing and loaded him aboard like cargo. The radio crackled with increasingly frantic transmissions from Kandahar Tower. "November 7-4 Charlie, this is Kandahar Tower. Respond immediately. You are flying through restricted airspace without clearance. Return to base immediately or you will be intercepted." Reyes reached over and switched off the radio. They'd be scrambling F-16 soon, but she had a head start and intimate knowledge of every radar gap between here and her destination. The real question was whether she'd live long enough to deliver her payload to the one journalist brave enough to publish the truth. Back in the Pentagon, 3 time zones away from the chaos unfolding in Afghanistan, Brigadier General Patricia, Iron Lady, Kane stood in the National Military Command Center, staring at the massive digital display showing global air traffic. A single red blip moved slowly across the screen, heading west from Kandahar toward the Pakistani border. "Sir, we have a problem," announced Major David Kim, the duty officer. "We've got a stolen C-130 heading for Pakistan with classified material aboard. The crew is not responding to radio calls, and satellite imagery confirms they have an unauthorized passenger." Kane's face remained impassive, but her mind was racing. She knew exactly who was flying that aircraft and exactly what classified material they were carrying. 3 years of careful planning, millions in black budget funds, and dozens of careers were about to be destroyed by one idealistic pilot with a conscience. "Has State been notified about the potential border violation?" Kane asked, her voice betraying nothing. "Yes, ma'am. They're coordinating with Pakistani intelligence, but if that aircraft enters their airspace without permission, they'll scramble their own interceptors." Kane nodded slowly. The Pakistanis wouldn't hesitate to shoot down an unauthorized American military aircraft. Problem solved, loose ends tied up, and Captain Reyes would die a hero's death, killed in the line of duty by enemy action. The truth would die with her. "What about our F-16s from Bagram?" Kane asked. 20 minutes out, but the C-130 will reach the border in 15. Perfect timing, Kane thought. She pulled out her secure phone and dialed a number she'd hoped never to use. It rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. "Mr. Director, this is General Kane. We have a Phoenix situation. I need immediate authorization for a defensive intercept over Pakistani airspace." The pause on the other end stretched for what felt like hours. Finally, "What's the collateral damage assessment?" "Minimal, crew of 2, 1 passenger, all expendable." "Are you certain the material will be recovered?" Kane looked at the red blip on the screen. "Sir, there won't be any material left to recover." Another pause. Phoenix is authorized for terminal intercept. Make it look like enemy action. Kane hung up and turned to Major Kim. Patch me through to the F-16 flight leader. Priority Alpha. The radio crackled to life. Viper 1-1, this is NMCC control. You are authorized for weapons-free engagement on target designation November 7 for Charlie. Rules of engagement are suspended. This is not a drill. The voice that responded was calm, professional. NMCC control. Viper 1-1 copies weapons free. Confirm authorization for engagement of U.S. military aircraft. Kane closed her eyes for just a moment. When she opened them, they were cold as winter steel. Viper 1-1 affirmative. Target is hostile. Repeat, target is hostile. Copy NMCC. Viper 1-1 engaging hostile target. Kane watched the red blip continue its westward track toward the border. In 10 minutes, it would all be over. Captain Phoenix, Reyes felt the C-130 shudder as she pushed it harder than it was ever meant to be pushed. The radar altimeter showed 200 feet, dangerously low even for daylight flying, potentially suicidal at night in mountainous terrain. But she could see the border ahead, marked by the subtle change in the color of the terrain on her night vision display. "Ghost, I'm picking up search radar," Santos reported, her voice tight with tension. "Multiple sources coming from behind us." Reyes didn't need to ask what kind of radar. She'd spent enough time in this theater to recognize the signature of an AN/APG-68 fire control radar, the type mounted on F-16 Fighting Falcons. Her own Air Force was hunting her now. "How long to the border?" she asked, throwing the C-130 into a bone-jarring turn to follow a river valley. 3 minutes, maybe less. In the cargo bay, Colonel Whitman was beginning to stir despite the sedative. Reyes could hear him mumbling incoherently over the intercom. Good. She wanted him awake when they landed. She wanted him to know exactly what was happening and why. The radio, which she'd switched back on to monitor emergency frequencies, suddenly burst to life with a transmission that made her blood freeze. "Phoenix, this is Viper 1-1. You are ordered to return to base immediately. Acknowledge." The call sign hit her like a physical blow. Viper 1 was Major Sarah Reaper Mitchell, her former squadron mate and one of the best pilots in the Air Force. They'd flown together in Iraq, covered each other's backs through countless missions, shared drinks and secrets and the unspoken bond that existed between combat aviators. Now Sarah was going to kill her. Reyes keyed the radio. "Sarah, it's Phoenix. Don't do this. You know me. You know I wouldn't be out here unless it was life or death." The response came immediately. "Phoenix, I have my orders. Return to base immediately or I will engage." "Sarah, listen to me. They killed Martinez. They killed Rodriguez and Williams and everyone else who got too close to the truth. They're using us, Sarah. We're nothing but expendable pieces on their chessboard." Static filled the airwaves for several seconds. Then, "Phoenix, you have 30 seconds to alter course." Reyes looked at the GPS display. The Pakistani border was less than 2 miles ahead. So close. She could see the lights of a small village on the other side, her destination, a remote airfield where an investigative journalist waited with a satellite uplink and the courage to broadcast the truth to the world. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Reyes whispered into the radio, "but some things are more important than orders." She pushed the throttles to maximum power and dove for the deck, the C-130's engine screaming in protest. Behind her, she could see the afterburner flames of the pursuing F-16s growing larger in her mirrors. The border rushed toward them at 300 miles per hour. The first missile launch warning tone filled the cockpit like the voice of death itself. Major Sarah Reaper Mitchell felt her finger hesitate over the weapon release button as the C-130 filled her heads-up display. Phoenix Reyes had been her wingman during the darkest days of the Iraq War, had saved her life over Fallujah when surface-to-air missiles filled the sky like deadly fireworks. They'd been sisters in the air, bound by trust and mutual respect, and the knowledge that they were among the few women in a profession that didn't always welcome them. Now Phoenix was a target in her crosshairs, and Mitchell had orders to shoot her down. Viper 1-1, target is approaching the border. You are weapons free for immediate engagement, came the transmission from command. Mitchell's training took over, even as her heart rebelled against what she was being asked to do. She selected an AIM-120 AMRAAM missile and achieved lock-on. The C-130 was flying so low that the shot would be tricky. Any lower and the missile might lose track or impact the ground before reaching its target. "Phoenix, this is your final warning," Mitchell transmitted. "Alter course immediately or I will fire." The response came back immediately, Phoenix's voice calm despite the circumstances. "Sarah, check your secure email when you get back to base. Look for the files dated 3 weeks ago. Operation Sandcastle. Then ask yourself if you still want to pull that trigger." Mitchell's finger froze. Operation Sandcastle was classified beyond her security clearance, but she'd heard whispers. Something about intelligence manipulation, civilian casualties being covered up, congressional investigators being stonewalled. The kind of whispers that got people transferred to desk jobs or worse. Viper 1-1, you are ordered to engage immediately. The command frequency crackled. The Pakistani border was less than a mile ahead. Mitchell could see muzzle flashes from the ground, Pakistani border guards firing rifles at the low-flying C-130. Ineffective against an aircraft, but a clear message: you are not welcome here. Mitchell made her decision. She triggered the missile release, but at the last second pulled up sharply, sending the AMRAAM high and wide. It streaked over the C-130 and impacted harmlessly in a mountainside 2 miles beyond the target. "Viper 1-1 missile away," she reported to command. "Target has entered Pakistani airspace. Pursuing aircraft would constitute an international incident. Request instructions." The response took longer than expected. Viper 1-1 returned to base. Mission complete. But the mission wasn't complete. Phoenix Reyes was still alive, still carrying whatever classified material had prompted this nightmare. As Mitchell banked her F-16 eastward toward home, she found herself hoping that Phoenix would make it to her destination. Whatever truth was worth stealing a C-130 and risking court-martial was truth the world probably needed to hear. In the cargo bay of the escaping C-130, Colonel Whitman was now fully awake and screaming threats that no one could hear over the roar of the engines. Phoenix Reyes smiled grimly as she lined up for final approach to the secret airfield. The hardest part was over. The real work was about to begin. The secret airfield was nothing more than a dirt strip carved out of the Pakistani desert, invisible to satellites and known only to smugglers, arms dealers, and those who traded in information too dangerous for legitimate channels. As Phoenix Reyes brought the C-130 down in a cloud of dust and grinding metal, she could see a single figure waiting by a battered Toyota pickup truck, the journalist who had agreed to meet her here. Marcus Webb had been investigating military corruption for the Washington Tribune for 15 years, long enough to know that when a serving military officer reached out with classified documents, it was either the biggest story of his career or an elaborate setup that would end with his disappearance in a foreign desert. As the C-130's engines wound down, he grabbed his satellite phone and recording equipment, preparing for what he hoped would be the former. Phoenix shut down the aircraft and performed the fastest post-flight inspection of her career. Every minute they remained on the ground increased their chances of being found by Pakistani military, or, worse, the American Special Operations team she knew would be dispatched as soon as her aircraft's location was confirmed. "Ghost, help me with our passenger," she called to Santos, who was already in the cargo bay cutting the restraints that held Colonel Whitman. The colonel was awake now, his eyes filled with rage and the dawning realization of what had happened to him. "Captain Reyes," he snarled, "you have no idea what you've done. This goes beyond military justice. This is treason. They will hunt you to the ends of the earth." Phoenix looked at him with contempt. "Colonel, they've been hunting people like me since this whole thing started. The only difference is now you're going to answer for what you've done." She grabbed the digital recorder Santos handed her and began documenting everything. Whitman's confession, obtained under duress but still potentially admissible. The contents of the flash drive. The names, dates, and locations of the cover-up that had cost American lives and billions in taxpayer money. Outside, Webb set up his satellite uplink, establishing an encrypted connection to his editor in Washington. Within minutes, the first wave of documents was uploading to servers around the world, insurance against attempts to suppress the story. "Captain," Webb called out, "I need you to go on record. The documents are damning, but I need testimony from someone with first-hand knowledge." Phoenix looked at the journalist, then at Santos, then at the sedated colonel who had orchestrated so much death and deception. She thought about her career, her pension, her future. Then she thought about the young soldiers who had died because of lies told by men like Whitman. "My name is Captain Evelyn Maria Reyes, serial number 4547 Golf Tango 7891, she began, looking directly into Webb's camera. "For the past 3 years, I have been witness to a systematic cover-up of war crimes, intelligence manipulation, and the assassination of American service members who threatened to expose the truth." As she spoke, outlining the conspiracy that reached from field commanders to the highest levels of the Pentagon, Phoenix could hear the distant sound of helicopters approaching from the east. Pakistani military, most likely, but possibly American Special Operations Forces operating with Pakistani approval. "We need to move," Santos said, monitoring the radio. "Multiple aircraft inbound, ETA 5 minutes. Webb was still uploading files, the progress bar showing 70% complete. "I need 3 more minutes," he said. Phoenix made the hardest decision of her life. "Ghost, take the truck and get out of here. If they capture all of us, this was for nothing." Santos shook her head. "I'm not leaving you here." "That's an order, Sergeant." The sound of helicopters was getting louder now, and Phoenix could see lights on the horizon, multiple aircraft in formation. They were out of time. The upload completed just as the first helicopter settled into a landing hover 50 yards away, rotor wash filling the air with blinding dust and debris. Phoenix grabbed the flash drive and pressed it into Webb's hand as Pakistani special forces fast-roped down from the aircraft. "Get this to the world," she said. "Make sure they know what really happened here." The detention facility in Islamabad was a monument to bureaucratic indifference. Concrete walls stained with decades of despair, fluorescent lights that flickered randomly, and the constant sound of distant voices speaking in languages Phoenix Reyes didn't understand. She had been here for 72 hours now, long enough to realize that her situation was far more complicated than simple imprisonment. The Pakistanis didn't seem to know what to do with her. She was an American military officer who had violated their airspace, but she was also carrying evidence of American war crimes, information that the Pakistani government could use as leverage in future negotiations. So she waited in a cell that was neither comfortable nor torturous, fed meals that were neither good nor inedible, while diplomats and intelligence officers decided her fate. On the 4th morning, her cell door opened to reveal a man in an expensive suit who spoke with an American accent, but carried himself like someone accustomed to operating in the shadows between nations. "Captain Reyes," he said, settling into the plastic chair across from her small table. "My name is David Chen. I work for the State Department. We've been negotiating for your release." Phoenix studied him carefully. Something about his manner suggested he wasn't entirely what he claimed to be. "What about my crew chief? Is Santos safe?" Sergeant Santos made it to the American embassy in Karachi. "She's being debriefed but is in no immediate danger." The journalist, Webb, published his story yesterday. It's causing quite a stir in Washington." Phoenix felt a wave of relief wash over her. "And Colonel Whitman?" Chen's expression darkened. "The colonel suffered a heart attack during transport. He died en route to a Pakistani military hospital." Phoenix stared at him. "A heart attack, how convenient." "These things happen, Captain. High-stress situations, advanced age, pre-existing conditions." Phoenix understood. Whitman had been eliminated to prevent him from testifying, from naming names, from exposing the full scope of the conspiracy. Dead men told no tales, especially when their deaths could be attributed to natural causes. "What happens to me now?" she asked. Chen leaned forward. "That depends. The Pakistani government is willing to release you to American custody, but there are conditions. You'll face court-martial for theft of military property, violation of airspace, and potentially treason. However, given the circumstances and the public attention your case has generated, there might be room for negotiation." Phoenix almost laughed. "You want me to keep quiet, disappear quietly into military prison and never speak about what I know?" "I want you to consider your options carefully, Captain. You've accomplished what you set out to do. The story is out. Congressional investigations are already beginning. Justice will be served through proper channels." Phoenix looked around the dingy cell, then back at Chen. "And if I refuse to cooperate?" Chen's smile was cold. "Then you'll discover that Pakistani detention facilities can be very unpleasant places for foreigners, especially foreigners who might accidentally fall downstairs or suffer food poisoning or encounter any number of unfortunate accidents." The threat was clear. Phoenix had a choice: cooperate and face military justice in an American prison, or refuse and die in a Pakistani cell, another casualty of the war on truth. She thought about the young soldiers whose deaths had started this entire chain of events, about the families who deserved to know why their loved ones had died, about the principle that some things were worth more than personal safety. "I'll take my chances with the court-martial," she said finally. Chen nodded as if he had expected this answer. "Very well, Captain. A transport will arrive tomorrow morning to take you back to the United States. I hope you're prepared for what comes next." As he left, Phoenix realized that her real battle was just beginning. The conspiracy she had exposed reached into the highest levels of government, and powerful people had already shown they were willing to kill to protect their secrets. But the truth was out now, spreading across the internet like wildfire, impossible to contain or suppress. Whatever happened to her next, she had succeeded in her mission. The story had been told. Justice would have to find its own way. Andrews Air Force Base outside Washington, D.C., had never looked so ominous to Phoenix rays as it did through the small window of the military transport aircraft that carried her back to American soil. FBI agents, military police, and what appeared to be a small army of lawyers waited on the tarmac as the aircraft taxied to a stop at a remote corner of the airfield, far from curious media attention. The moment Phoenix stepped off the aircraft, still wearing the flight suit she'd stolen the C-130 in a week earlier, she was placed in handcuffs and read her rights. The charges were extensive: theft of military property, desertion, violating international airspace, kidnapping, and treason. Each charge carried potential decades in military prison. But as they loaded her into an unmarked sedan for the drive to the detention facility at Quantico, Phoenix couldn't help but notice something unusual. Mixed in with the law enforcement personnel were news crews held back by military police, and beyond the security perimeter, she could see protesters carrying signs reading "Free Phoenix" and "Truth is not treason." The story had caught the public imagination in ways none of them had anticipated. Marcus Webb's initial article in the Washington Tribune had been picked up by every major news network within hours. The classified documents Phoenix had provided detailed not just the specific cover-up she'd uncovered, but a pattern of deception and manipulation that stretched back years. Congressional hearings were already being scheduled. Three high-ranking Pentagon officials had announced their resignations. The Secretary of Defense was facing calls for impeachment. At the detention facility, Phoenix was processed like any other military prisoner, photographed, fingerprinted, issued standard detention clothing, and assigned to a single cell in the maximum security wing. Her court-appointed defense attorney, Colonel Rebecca Martinez, arrived within hours of her arrival. "Captain Reyes," Martinez said, reviewing the thick folder of charges and evidence, "I'm not going to lie to you. This is bad. The prosecution is pushing for life imprisonment on the treason charge alone. They're claiming that your actions endangered national security and provided aid and comfort to America's enemies." Phoenix looked at her attorney, a career military lawyer with 20 years' experience defending service members accused of everything from simple assault to war crimes. "Colonel, are you familiar with the Nuremberg principles?" Martinez nodded slowly. "The legal standards established after World War II regarding the responsibility of individuals to refuse illegal orders. That's what this is about. I was ordered, indirectly but clearly, to remain silent about war crimes. I refused to follow that order. If that makes me a traitor, then every American soldier who refused to commit atrocities is a traitor." Over the following weeks, Phoenix's case became a lightning rod for debates about military justice, whistleblower protection, and the balance between national security and governmental accountability. Legal scholars argued about the precedents. Military officers publicly debated whether Phoenix was a hero or a criminal. Politicians positioned themselves on either side of the issue based on polling data and party affiliation. But in her cell at Quantico, Phoenix found herself strangely at peace. She had done what she believed was right, and the consequences, whatever they might be, were a price she was willing to pay. The truth was out now. Congressional investigators were following the leads she had provided. Families of deceased soldiers were finally getting answers about how their loved ones had died. The court-martial was scheduled to begin in 6 weeks. Phoenix knew that regardless of the verdict, her military career was over. She would never fly again, never wear the uniform that had defined her adult life. But sometimes sacrifice was necessary. Sometimes one person had to be willing to lose everything to ensure that the truth survived. The military courtroom at Quantico was packed beyond capacity on the first day of Captain Phoenix Reyes' court-martial. Media representatives from around the world occupied the limited public seating, while overflow crowds watched on closed-circuit television in adjacent rooms. Outside, protesters both supporting and condemning Phoenix maintained round-the-clock vigils, their chants audible even through the building's thick walls. The military judge, Colonel William Harrison, was a 25-year veteran of the Army Judge Advocate General's Corps, known for his meticulous attention to legal precedent and his insistence on courtroom decorum. As he entered the courtroom and the assembled crowd rose to their feet, the weight of history settled over the proceedings like morning fog. Phoenix sat at the defense table wearing her dress blue uniform, her ribbons and decorations a testament to 12 years of distinguished service. She had requested permission to wear the uniform despite her confinement, wanting to face judgment as a soldier rather than as a common criminal. The prosecution was led by Brigadier General Patricia Kane herself, the same officer who had authorized the missile attack that was supposed to kill Phoenix over Afghanistan. Kane's presence at the prosecutor's table sent a clear message. This case was about more than one rogue pilot. This was about preserving the chain of command and military discipline in the face of unprecedented challenges to authority. "The government will prove," Kane announced in her opening statement, "that the defendant willfully and deliberately betrayed her oath as an officer, stole military property, endangered classified national security information, and provided aid and comfort to America's enemies through her reckless and treasonous actions." Phoenix's defense attorney, Colonel Martinez, stood to present the defense opening. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not about theft or treason. This case is about courage. The courage to do what is right when everyone around you is doing what is expedient. Captain Reyes discovered evidence of war crimes, and when official channels failed to address those crimes, she took the only action available to a soldier with a conscience. The trial that followed became a window into the darkest corners of America's military involvement in Afghanistan. Witnesses testified about falsified intelligence reports, civilian casualties that were covered up, and the systematic elimination of anyone who threatened to expose the truth. The classified documents Phoenix had provided were entered into evidence, their contents causing several jury members to visibly react with shock and dismay. On the third day of testimony, Technical Sergeant Maria Santos took the stand. Her loyalty to Phoenix was evident, but her testimony was damaging to the defense case. Under cross-examination by General Kane, Santos admitted that she had followed Phoenix's orders without question, even when she knew those orders were illegal. "Sergeant Santos," Kane pressed, "did Captain Reyes at any time suggest going through proper channels to report her concerns?" Santos hesitated before answering. "Ma'am, we both knew that people who went through proper channels ended up dead or transferred to places where they couldn't cause trouble." The courtroom fell silent at this admission. Kane smiled slightly. "So you're saying that Captain Reyes chose to take the law into her own hands rather than trust the military justice system?" "I'm saying she chose to save lives rather than protect careers," Santos replied, her voice steady despite the obvious hostility of the prosecutor. As the trial progressed, it became clear that the case would ultimately turn on a single question. Could a military officer be justified in breaking the law to expose criminal activity by superior officers? Legal precedent suggested the answer was no. The military chain of command was absolute, and individual soldiers were not authorized to make independent judgments about the legality of orders or policies. But precedent had never dealt with a case quite like this one, where the evidence of criminal wrongdoing was so overwhelming and the official response so inadequate. Week 2 of the court-martial brought the most dramatic testimony yet, as Marcus Webb, the journalist who had published Phoenix's leaked documents, was called to testify for the defense. Despite government attempts to classify his testimony and exclude the media, Judge Harrison ruled that the public interest required open proceedings. Webb's testimony was methodical and devastating. He walked the jury through each document Phoenix had provided, explaining how they revealed a pattern of deception that included falsifying casualty reports, manipulating intelligence assessments, and systematically covering up incidents that violated the laws of war. The documents Captain Reyes provided, Webb testified, detailed at least 47 separate incidents where civilian casualties were misreported, intelligence was fabricated to justify military actions, and evidence of war crimes was deliberately suppressed. General Kane's cross-examination was aggressive. "Mr. Webb, isn't it true that you received these documents from someone who had stolen them illegally?" "General, I received these documents from someone who believed the American people had a right to know what was being done in their name." "That's not what I asked. Did you know the documents were stolen?" Webb paused, understanding the legal trap being laid for him. "I knew they were classified. I also knew they documented criminal activity that was being covered up." The prosecution's case relied heavily on the testimony of Air Force officers who had worked with Phoenix and could attest to her apparent mental instability in the months leading up to her flight to Pakistan. They painted a picture of a pilot who had become increasingly erratic, questioning orders, making inappropriate comments about mission parameters, and displaying signs of what military psychologists might classify as a breakdown. But the defense countered with character witnesses who testified to Phoenix's exemplary service record, her dedication to her fellow airmen, and her unwavering integrity throughout her career. Pilot after pilot took the stand to describe missions where Phoenix had risked her own life to protect others, situations where her judgment and courage had saved American lives. The most compelling witness was Major Sarah Mitchell, the F-16 pilot who had been ordered to shoot down Phoenix's C-130. Mitchell's testimony was a bombshell that neither prosecution nor defense had fully anticipated. "I was ordered to fire on Captain Ray's aircraft," Mitchell testified, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was told the aircraft was hostile, that it posed an imminent threat to American forces." Colonel Martinez leaned forward. "Major, did you fire on Captain Ray's?" Mitchell's eyes found Phoenix across the courtroom. "I fired a missile, yes, but I deliberately aimed to miss. I could not bring myself to kill someone I knew to be an honorable officer based on orders that I suspected were illegal." The courtroom erupted in murmurs and gasps. Judge Harrison gavelled for order, but the damage was done. A serving military officer had just admitted under oath to deliberately disobeying a direct order because she believed it was morally wrong. General Kane's redirect examination was brief but pointed. "Major Mitchell, are you saying that individual military officers should be free to ignore lawful orders whenever they personally disagree with them?" Mitchell's answer would become one of the most quoted statements of the entire trial. "Ma'am, I'm saying that we swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Sometimes that oath requires us to choose between following orders and following our conscience." As the testimony phase of the trial concluded, it was clear that Phoenix's case had evolved beyond a simple military justice proceeding. It had become a referendum on the nature of military service, the limits of obedience, and the responsibility of individual soldiers to resist unlawful orders. The closing arguments would determine whether Phoenix was remembered as a traitor or a hero. General Kane's closing argument was a masterpiece of legal precision and emotional manipulation. Standing before the jury of military officers, she spoke not as a prosecutor but as a guardian of military tradition and discipline. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "we are not here to debate the validity of Captain Ray's concerns about military policy. We are here to determine whether a commissioned officer in the United States Air Force has the right to steal military property, violate international law, and compromise classified information simply because she disagrees with her superior's decisions." Kane walked slowly along the jury,